Hope everyone is doing okay on this Friday early afternoon here I'm based in Ottawa, Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. Hope everyone is doing okay wherever you are. Okay. Well, with that, I guess we'll get started and people keep trickling in and catching up. Welcome everyone to the second installment of the Therapy as Political Speaker series. We're so very excited to have you all here in a conversation with Quill Christie-Peters, who is an Anishinaabe author, educator, and visual artist. First, we'll start by introducing ourselves. Therapists for Palestine is a grassroots organization committed to a free Palestine and liberatory movements extending from Turtle Island across the globe. We have a two-pronged mandate. First, working with our professional organizations to pass solidarity statements and or boycott, divest sanctions motions, also known as BDS, and to include anti-Palestinian racism under their DEI initiatives. And the second one is to institute change and take action in our fields and work sites to protect, support, and encourage politicized therapists who take part in pro-Palestinian spaces. And as settlers on Turtle Island, we recognize that we too are directly implicated in ongoing colonialism on this land and are committed to Indigenous sovereignty, including across the territory now called Ontario, where a lot of our practitioners reside. And that includes land back of so-called crown lands to Indigenous peoples, reparations for lands irreparably damaged, and policies that center Indigenous governance and self-determination. In our Therapy is Political series, of which this is the second installment, we aim to raise awareness and to empower audiences towards an anti-colonial approach within the mental health field, while strongly maintaining Palestine at the center of our conversations and movement. Along the way, we hope to connect anti-colonial mental health workers to one another and to introduce seekers of psychotherapy services to the liberatory possibilities in anti-colonial therapy. Before we start today, we encourage folks to take a moment and reflect and maybe ask ourselves two questions. How am I embodying my values and beliefs? And this can include decolonization, anti-oppression, social justice. How am I embodying these values in my daily practice? And if I'm not already, how can I connect with those such that we can center our values in our practices? So feel free to take a moment to reflect on that before we move on. And take a couple seconds right here. And now a note about your donations. Your optional donations when you registered for this event made this possible and will go towards operational costs to run this event and ensuring compensation for our speaker. All remaining proceeds are being donated to two grassroots efforts, Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction and the Senabel Team in Gaza, which is a Palestinian-led mutual aid initiative providing food to families in Gaza and displaced families in Egypt. So we'll be adding those links in the chat as well, in case you want to make a direct donation to those grassroots organizations as well. And fourthly, some Zoom housekeeping items. This event will be recorded, so please keep this in mind for your own comfort or confidentiality needs as you engage. Please keep yourself muted throughout the event. In the chat box, you're welcome to introduce yourself with your name, your profession, your location if you feel comfortable. And feel free to share reflections or questions throughout, as we will have folks monitoring and synthesizing questions in the chat. And there will also be moderators present to watch and manage any harm Anyone who enacts behaviors that are harmful will be immediately removed from the Zoom meeting. Now, here's the structure of our next an hour and a half hours together in this space. We will have a back and forth question and answer with Quill and Tanya representing Therapists for Palestine. And time permitting, we'll have questions from the audience write So feel free to write your questions in the chat box as we go along. And finally, before we start, let me introduce our speaker today. Quill Christie-Peters is an Anishinaabe educator and self-taught visual artist. She is the founder and director of the Indigenous Youth Residency Program, an artist residency for Indigenous youth that engages land-based creative practices through Anishinaabe artistic methodologies. She holds a master's degree in Indigenous Governance on Anishinaabe art making as a process of falling in love, and sits on the board of directors for Native Women in the Arts. She is the author of her first full-length nonfiction book, On Wholeness, Anishinaabe Pathways to Embodiment and Collective Liberation, published by House of Anansi Press. We'll also be putting the link to this book in the chat, so feel free to purchase the book from your local independent bookstore as well. And from the Therapists for Palestine side, in conversation with Quill in our question and answer, will be Tanya Tabar, who is a Palestinian Lebanese queer psychotherapist and naturopathic doctor. She's particularly interested in community and liberation psychology and how that can be integrated in organizing and across social movements. So without further ado, I will pass it along to Tanya to start our question and answer with Quill. Thank you.
Thank you, Doro. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Quill. Hi, Quill.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I want to start with the title and theme of your book for those who haven't seen it, On Wholeness. And the way you define wholeness and talk about wholeness is as a practice that resources us to resist and is connected to our responsibility to deepen collective liberation, which is so much more expansive than the way it's defined in the settler colonial frame, which is very limited to the individual. And that's the frame we often learn in psychotherapy school. So can you share with us what wholeness means to you and why you wrote this book?
Yeah, I think wholeness to me is basically being in conversation with all of the different relationships that make me who I am as an Anishinaabe person. I think it's really interesting that the book sometimes gets placed into like healing categories. And then for me, it's not really about healing. In fact, the kind of conclusion of the book is we can't really be whole in a world of colonialism and violence and genocide. And so the book is more about finding moments of wholeness, of like dancing with my own wholeness, but more so working towards collective liberation, collective wholeness, first and foremost, and acknowledging that, like, yeah, I am not whole, and I don't want to be whole in this context right now. What would it mean for me to be well and whole in this world, in this place, in this moment? So that is interesting for me because the book often is like, healing. And I'm like, actually, no, it's about like learning to live with holes and also desire wholeness outside of ourselves more so than within ourselves. So that's what wholeness means to me. And I approach it in a way that is really rooted in my identity as an Anishinaabe person. So I'm talking about my relationships to my ancestors. I'm talking about the stars, my homelands, but I'm also talking about my relationships to other people by virtue of imperialism. And so it's kind of an expansively relational take on in order to be whole, we have to be plugged into all of these relationships that influence us and make us who we are.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that you say that, it's not a book about healing and being whole and feeling good all the time. And at the same time, I've actually found the book really healing when I read it. Um, and I think part of that is because of the way you spoke about wholeness not being an individual process and connected to these, to the context that we're in, which is certainly not a context of wholeness, right? Um, and so, you know, given this series is about therapy, and as everyone knows, like we're focusing on therapy being political, um, and like other disciplines, even though, that is rejected by many of our colleagues or some of our colleagues. So I want to kind of talk about some of the themes that come up that can also come up in psychotherapy. And one of those pieces is shame. And I noticed that this, again, was framed not in the way that we frame it, which is connected to we, as in, you know, mainstream psychotherapy or mainstream psychology. Of course, decolonial and liberation psychology are, schools of thought that frame it differently. But in terms of the way like mainstream psychotherapy frames shame, it's this individual process with your family of origin and connected to interpersonal relationships. Um, and the way you talk about shame is that it's never separate from the context of settler colonialism. And you talk about how it's actually a tool of the settler colony to remove the body from the self, and how it makes us hate ourselves, feel unworthy of giving and receiving love. And so, throughout your book, when I was reading this, I was also reflecting on how, since the genocide, I've also been forced to deeply confront my own feelings of shame and worthlessness and dehumanization, and how that, triggered an intense kind of looking at that for me. And I think that, like in liberatory movements, we have to explore how this lives within us, and how this is what I really liked about the book, how we move this outside of ourselves, like how we move the shame outside of ourselves because it's not ours to carry. So, yeah, I was wondering if you could talk more about your process around shame and why it's such an important theme in your book, or at least it felt important for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shame is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I think probably coming from working with Indigenous youth and kind of recognizing shame as this barrier to feeling whole or liberation. For me, shame is a really, really strong colonial tool because it basically obscures the source of harm that you're feeling the shame from in the first place. So, shame kind of invisibilizes where our energy should be directed. And instead, there's nowhere else to put that energy besides like on yourself. So, feeling like you are somehow at fault for the conditions that you exist within. In the context of working with Indigenous youth, and in the context of Turtle Island, the shame that we carry is so heavy. There's shame from all of the disconnections that we experience by virtue of colonialism. There's shame tied to residential school system. So there's like a very specific shame about bodies, Indigenous bodies here, and our ability to feel pleasure and joy in those bodies. Um, it's a life of shame, basically, to be a Native person on Turtle Island. And for me, why I focus so much in my work with youth on anti-colonial education is because that is the true source of these kind of conditions that we're feeling. So if you can't understand colonialism or you're just not paying attention, but you're feeling all of these disconnections and traumas and hurt and harm, uh, that creates shame. You take it on as an individual. As soon as you give young people the tools to name their experiences in relation to colonialism or imperialism or whatever structure of power and violence, then it makes sense. And that person gets to lift the shame off themselves and actually redirect that energy towards righteous anger and desires for accountability from those structures. And why I care so much about shame, thinking about shame, is because I've seen how beautiful and powerful it is when young people are able to step outside of their shame, when the light bulbs go off of like, oh my God, like everything I thought was wrong with me, I thought was wrong with my family, that I did something wrong, that they did something wrong, that they're not good people, that I'm not a good person, is actually orchestrated by this system. That's me made that work some of the most important work I think I'll ever do in my life. Um, and so that's why shame is in the book a little bit. And, I definitely think it's applicable to a context of imperialism too, and thinking about giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves the space to connect what we're feeling to the orchestration of our own disconnections, our own inertias, our own barriers to action. Because I guess, we're all I'm feeling shame in this moment, right? We're at this place where we're still not doing anything about what's happening in Palestine. And, you know, some of us have tried really hard and some of us haven't. And everyone's, lots of people I know are maybe not naming that it's shame, but definitely feeling like, why can't we do anything about this? And there's goodness in there for some people. Some people need to feel the shame more, but also some people need to feel it less. And so for me, I'm somebody who, you know, I think when we connect it to imperialism and we just take a breath and just say, like, this is being orchestrated, this inertia is orchestrated. No one of us is going to be able to like single-handedly get us out of like world domination and imperialism and all these forms of genocide. That gives me a little bit room to breathe, and a little bit of room to resource myself, to think critically about, okay, maybe we're not able to do something right now, but we can keep trying, we can keep building, we can keep scheming. I think requires us to reject that shame. But then also some of us should feel it more. So it's about
Mhm.
also being honest with where you're at, how much you've sacrificed for this, for the world that you want to see. And I think a lot of us need to sacrifice more. And I think also a lot of us need to not be trapped in our shame and find the balance.
Mhm. Yeah, I was, and thanks for naming, the different spectrum of, people of shame and how some people do need actually to have a little bit more shame and some people to need to have a lot less shame. Um, and so yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you naming the youth because that's also kind of what made me think of that question. It was specifically your work with youth and how I imagine that was like such a transformational process for them. And I can only also, yeah, I can imagine like it offered them so much more spaciousness and um, action potentially.
Mhm. Yeah, it was that chunk of time in my life, I think it was about 8 years, was so important. to me. And like I speak with that work with such reverence because I learned so much from those young people. But also it tired me out. I feel like I'm still recovering from doing that work. And um, I think that's like another theme of this conversation is just like, how do we sustain liberatory work? Because it's really, really hard to do. And it's something I've kind of been thinking about lately is just infrastructures of care, infrastructure so that we can sacrifice more. Because right now it's so individualistic that if you are somebody who chooses to sacrifice a lot for this moment, unfortunately there's not much help for you afterwards. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing, there's no cohesion right now. So that's kind of where my brain has been lately.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like sharing about what you've been thinking about, or have you been reflecting more on the question itself?
More the question itself, and I think, and this is my main frustration with any of my art or creative thinking is I always just feel like I don't have the time to think about the question. So like I've been thinking about the question. It's a complicated answer, but I don't have time to find that answer right now, which is
Mm-hmm.
in itself the answer because part of the conditions that are preventing us from making a better world are that we're just in such a hyper time consuming era. Even if I think about my life 5 years ago, um, how my time is accounted for today is just so much more. I don't have any wiggle room. And I know like I'm a single parent, so I have, additional responsibilities, but even still, I just feel like there's been a real erosion, micro erosion, so we don't notice of like how we use our time in our day. And so that's just a question I've been thinking about. I don't have the answers to, and I think the answers will only come by action, by
Mm-hmm.
doing and trying. And I'm just trying to pick myself back up. But in a couple months, I think I'll be ready to hit the ground running again.
Um, yeah, this kind of makes me think about how you wrote in your book about the moment, like the shift of October 2023 for you, and how, you know, we, and I'll say we because I feel like similarly to you, is that we were kind of woken up and forced into, you describe it as forced to in embodiment. Um, for me, it's forced to kind of look at my responsibility. Um, can you, yeah, share with us what that was like for you and how it's shaped you?
Hmm. Yeah, I think too that moment kind of connects back to our conversation on shame too, and thinking about like for me, I wanted to be really honest with like how that moment changed me. And I feel like if I was working from a place of shame, I might feel like, oh, I have to like twist the truth to make it seem like I've always like been this way or something. There's that like shame. But again, it's like I feel so much grace from like connecting shame to colonialism and imperialism for myself. And so that's why it was easy for me to kind of write about that moment really earnestly and be like, hey, here were my faults. I like, cared about Palestine before 2023, but not in any action, like only theoretical. Um, and to really get into that, like what does that mean about imperialism when like somebody like myself who is already thinking about colonialism so intimately and working with my community through an anti-colonial lens, what does it mean when even somebody like that is not like actioning anything for other people around the world experiencing genocide and similar things that have happened to my people? So I
Mhm.
really wanted to get into that honestly. And for me, yeah, like October of 2023 was when I was sitting down to write this book. Um, and I had a whole romanticized vision. I was gonna spend the year writing this book, and then October happened and everything changed. I couldn't write, I couldn't paint. Um, Everything felt so irrelevant. Every part of my life felt irrelevant besides organizing and my daughter. And even those are like intertwined. Um, and then, yeah, it was quite alienating as well. The world kept going. And I remember just like being in public spaces and being like, I can't take this. Like, I cannot believe that people, like, we just keep going. So the moment was really uncomfortable for me. Really, I just felt so, I felt so in it. And I kind of, there's a little bit in the chapter about Palestine about how spiritual that time was for me and how I really did feel kind of called into my responsibilities from my own ancestors and my own spirituality. So all of that was happening. But yeah, it completely changed me. And it just like instantly, I just was given all of these lessons about my own blind spots, about like, oh my God, like how can I again be this person who is like doing anti-colonial work for so long and I haven't like moved this into action? So it was this big reckoning moment for me. It was, or it has been also heartbreaking to um feel like there's still so many people who like are not deeply changed by the moment. I find that as time goes on, it's just very, that part is hard. Um, and yeah, just deeply spiritual and deeply related to my identity as like an Anishinaabe parent. Um, just so much learning, so much growth. And then I, did have to finish the book in a very short period of time. But it made so much sense to weave Palestine into the book as it stood already, with kind of the crescendo or like the ending of the book, reckoning with how being whole can actually be incredibly painful, and how I felt called, although like, what Palestine taught me, like it was so painful. I was whole when I was, organizing, and I was whole when I was like fighting for that liberation. Um, and so it just made so much sense for the book and kind of brought us to that place.
Yeah, I really like the way you said in the book that you're not sad for Palestine, but you feel grief for this world. And you make that differentiation from, oh, Palestine is separate from non-Palestinians. Like, paraphrasing, but you say that it's like we're actually all, we're connected. Um, and I wanted to ask, like, what, with that worldview, what kind of possibilities do you imagine or do you know with the worldview that, like, actually, this isn't someone separate from me. This isn't like a victim that I'm sad for, but this is actually someone I am in relationship with, even if I don't know them personally, or even if they're, across oceans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like for me, it's not even like what possibilities can come from that. It's like that's what has to happen for the future of our world. Do you know what I mean? Like, um, and I feel like it's so tied to what colonialism and imperialism have taken from us, specifically related to our worldview and our sense of self, is that hyper individualism that would make somebody feel like they can look at what's happening in Palestine and think like that's so separate from me. Maybe I have empathy for them. Um, and I feel so grateful to come from a different worldview that innately sees and feels that as a loss to our collective world and as a responsibility that I innately have, not for those people, but for our world and the ways that we're connected. Um, I think we all have to do that work and reclaim our own worldviews untouched by the Western world, untouched by imperialism. And it happens on both a micro and a macro scale. Micro, as in, like, do you care about your neighbors? Can you give beyond yourself? And macro, as in, like, thinking about those children across the seas are mine. Like, those are our children, and not just in like a cliche way, but actually feeling that in your like deepest sense of self and purpose. And I think that's kind of what the book is a celebration of, is like, as an Anishinaabe person, like having those responsibilities is actually such a beautiful way of existing in the world. And I hope it allows other folks who read it, particularly who support whiteness or who are white, to reckon with that as something that's been taken away from them. And what would it mean to insist on a different worldview where you are considering yourself as connected to others through a responsibility lens. And I really think that's the only way that we're going to have life and love beyond this moment of crumbling.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about, thanks, Quill. I'm just sitting with that. And I want to talk about embodiment and disembodiment, and how you don't talk about them as in this binary, but as, embodiment is a way to, it can support us in liberation, and can support us in giving us capacity to resist. And this embodiment is also a survival strategy that can do the same. And I noticed that, like, there wasn't a judgment with each one. Like, it wasn't that, it wasn't a binary, like, this is disembodiment is good or bad, and embodiment is good or bad. And yeah, and I guess I just wanted to hear your reflections on that, if there's anything you want to share.
Yeah, I think that part to me was really important because I didn't want somebody to read the book and think like, oh, I have to be embodied, or like I have to strive to be embodied. Um, there are lots of people in my family who will never be embodied, but they're still contributing to liberation and to their own wholeness. Um, and so for me, it's more about like strategizing within a context of forced disembodiment, of how to find those pockets where you can dance with your own embodiment, even if it's brief. So I talk about, like art for me, that's a moment where even if I'm so disassociated, if I'm painting, like I'm present in a different way in my body. Becoming a parent taught me that specifically through like birth, and that experience. Um, and I guess because you're all therapists too, I would say like disembodiment, yeah, like disembodiment can be really smart. Um, like a smart choice, but also smart in, like, if we were to think of disembodiment as like a living entity, it's smart in how it chooses to live in our bodies. And that's something that I really struggle with is, I've had different therapists over the years, and every single one is always like, after a couple years, they're like, you know what's going, you got this, because I'm able to sit and intellectualize what's like, I'm able to say like, this happened to me, this is what I should do, this is what I'm doing to deal with it, this is how I feel. But just because you're able to verbalize and see how all your traumas are working doesn't mean you are doing anything about the body. And about, that in and of itself, for me anyways, is a big how I protect myself. So thinking about disembodiment too as something really smart. And in my own therapy journey, I've been searching for somebody to get that and to like push me further and to really get me into, past the theoretical core, like what are the feelings, what's in your body, how do we get you closer to your body, in the ways that are available to you, knowing that yes, we will not solve disembodiment. We will not even solve it because it's a collective issue as well. So disembodiment for me, sure, I have my own individual forms of disembodiment from my own traumas in life and whatever. But I also have collective disembodiment where like the conditions of the world around me are a lot. They're a lot for all of us. And so I feel like we're also all experiencing this collective pressure to disembody because it's just too much. It's too much to be alive right now. So I think holding that balance is um, really important. And it's interesting to think of kind of intellectualizing our disembodiment as like a way that it might hold on to us and our bodies, and how cunning it is. So it's like challenging it, but also, recognizing that we are going to dance, like we are just in a context of disembodiment.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think it is too much. Um, and you co-organized a delegation for Palestinians to your territory, Treaty 3, Palestinians and Anishinaabe folks. There was last year, which was mostly youth, and the year before, which I had the honor of joining. And it was one of the first times, like in that period, that I was able to feel embodied. Um, and I think, you talk about embodiment and the connection to land. Um, and so you wanted to offer, something to Palestinians. You wanted to offer like holding Palestinians in this moment, which was, such a beautiful offering for us. And many of us felt like and we said like we're the closest to Palestine that we have felt being on your territory in a while, or some people had never even been. So, that was so significant for folks. Um, and and yeah, so I think it offered us like a moment or a few moments of embodiment during a time that, it was way too much, and it is still way too much, but that moment, it was way too much. Um, so yeah, I will forever be grateful for that. And yeah, I wanted to hear if you have any reflections on that work and if there's anything you want to share, like now it's 1 or 2 years later.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the rationale for that work is thinking about like what has allowed Anishinaabe people to persist through our own forms of genocide, and then, more recently our own kind of like experiences of violence, but also disembodiment and harm and death, and feeling like the only thing that could do that was our land and our ceremonies. And I think that's truly how Anishinaabe people have persisted, is like, no matter how broken we are or how disembodied, we can always be held by the land. We can always go into our ceremonies and like razor sharp embodiment, right? And so we just wanted to share that with Palestinian folks. I mean, the first year it was like, right, some of the organizers who we had been working with, and just seeing like the grief and how much people were carrying, and thinking, what can we possibly offer this moment from who we are? Um, and then the second year kind of pivoted to focus more on youth and young people, but the same idea, like how can our land hold them and ceremony hold them? Um, I think my reflections from that work, like I I think of that work a lot in conversation with the youth work that I did. Like it was a lot of the same people and like involved, like Al, and the same kind of like format of when we took a trip. And so I think of that work as in conversation with the youth work, and kind of moving forward in that way. Um, the one thing that I'm thinking about now, though, as we like decide if we, run it again, or like what to do, is just again the infrastructure around this type of work. And um, I am burnt out in a big way. And so how do we nourish this work in a sustainable way? Or do we just have to have more grace, and like it's okay to take a year off and like then continue? Like scale is hard, right? There's so much urgency, but also if there's one thing I know as an Anishinaabe person, is like things take time. Things can take time, especially this type of work, which is meant to, not solve the genocide in Palestine, but builds intimate relationships between our communities. So that's what I'm thinking about lately, is just sustainability. How do we keep it going? When is it okay to just take a moment? Um, how do we shift and grow the work? But yeah, it was, so meaningful for me as well, and so beautiful to see on like the Anishinaabe side, like the people who emerged from our communities who wanted to be involved in this work as well. But ultimately needs to continue in some way. And so just trying to think about how.
And I do, yeah, thanks, Quill. I do think that's a question, like a really important question after these kind of 2 years of many of us burning out and moving from that place of urgency, and now realizing, okay, we can't really move like that to sustain ourselves. So I really, yeah, I appreciate the question, and the idea of like, how do we create some kind of like what does it look like? Is it like a structure? Is it even just, asking the question and thinking about it, I think is really important.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's just like, yeah, also when you genuinely care about building a better world, it's also like taking a break also isn't really good for my well-being. So it's like this double, like it's like, okay, you either can't push forward even though you know you're beyond your capacity, you're gonna pay for it, or you take a break, but you're like, you part of yourself is dying. It's like, what do you do? And I think it comes down to like, there isn't a critical mass of, in my opinion, there's not a critical mass of people doing genuine liberatory work. Way more people in my life could be doing this work. And it's not a judgment on folks, it's the nature of like our world in the West, you know? But I think then once you are somebody who is doing that work, you just know if you step away, it's not going to happen. And so it creates these conditions of like really, really big responsibility. And I feel like it's something I've seen outside of Palestine organizing, just in Indigenous organizing, is like how many times I've seen like the Native moms being like, I'll do it, fine, I'll do it beyond my means because no one's going to do it if I don't do it. And so I think it's also, we just need, how nice would it be to be like, oh, I'm really, really burnt out. Like I'm going to step away, but I know the work will continue by like all these bodies and all these thoughts. And how nice would that it get to feel to get to that point? But I think we're at a point now where it's like we need more people willing to sacrifice, willing to do this work. And then we can cycle out, we can take breaks and not worry about nothing happening while we do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I wanted to ask you, like, so you wrote this incredible book, and I wanted to ask, what's next for you? Any ideas? Is it taking a break? Anything cooking for you?
Yeah, I mean, I told myself I would take a break, but it's been like the busiest time in my life. Um, but I do feel like I'm thinking about a lot of things. One of my dreams was to make a version of the book, like a baby board book version. So it's more like a lullaby that the parents would like recite to the baby about like their wholeness and liberation and all this stuff. That was my dream. But then when I get into it, I'm like, that no one needs that right now. Like there's bigger fish to fry. And I'm like, I should, I am, my mind is turning about like what to offer this moment next.
Mhm.
The delegations were a specific moment in time. I think I've learned a lot in the past couple months, even about what's happening in Minneapolis, which is actually my traditional territory as well. Um,
Oh,
like my family, like before the border and everything, we had sites all the way down into that area and all the way west to Winnipeg. So I've been thinking a lot about that moment and just about how, maybe another one of my blind spots is I've worked so intimately with my own community. Then I did a little bit of work with Palestinian communities. But what would it look like to do the work with just whoever's around me and to think also micro about the work, which is
mhm.
not comfortable for me, right? So it's more comfortable for me to be like, yes, I will work with my own communities or work with people who want to know about imperialism and liberation. So I'm wondering if that's like a blind spot and how I could do a little bit more of that invisible micro work that might actually help create the sustainability for the other work. If we're like can lean on our neighbors or the people on our street or can create these networks where we're sharing resources and cooking for one another or whatever it is, then maybe it would be easier in a couple years to like run the delegation again and feel supported. So I'm trying to sit with my own blind spots and sit with what the moment is teaching us from all these different things that are happening around the world. Um, but also wishing myself to have a rest. And also I think it's been so long since I've had a rest. And not because I'm a good person or not because I'm like, oh, I just like spend my whole life like working for a community. I think it's also like I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to stop. So maybe that's more a question for all the therapists. But it's like also getting comfortable. How do we feel comfortable with rest when we are invested in liberation and we know that every moment counts and that people are dying and people are being hurt? And like, how do we, I can say it in theory, like I know people say that all the time, like, joy is what we fight for. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of others. But in actual practice, like I'm very uncomfortable with rest. And I actually don't even know what I need or what I want when I'm not helping or contributing. And so I think that's also something I should work on as my next project.
I love that. I love that rest is your next project. And I hope it comes.
I hope so too. I feel like it won't, but we can, at least I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all here and we'll hold you accountable.
Yeah.
No, no, we won't. Okay, there are a couple audience questions. So Quill, you are a visual artist as well as a writer. In what ways does creative practice contribute to the pathways of wholeness you describe?
Yeah, for me, art is where I feel in conversation with who I am and in conversation with my ancestors. Because you're all therapists too, I'll maybe like I've been thinking about there's this painting I did, and basically I was going through this tough time in my life when I was like really reckoning with what my dad had gone through in residential school. And so I decided to, and I kept just having these thoughts of like going back in time and holding him as a little child and like, what would I say? What would I do? Would we just hug? Would I tell him something about the future? And so I kept thinking about that. And so I decided to paint it. And so I have this painting where it's me as like an adult and it's him as like, a 6-year old. And it's that moment that I've like time traveled back to hold him. And also underneath the painting is like this poem that I wrote for my dad. Parts of it are in the book. And yeah, so that really helped me process those feelings. And then it was years later, I tried EMDR and I was like, oh my God, like it's so similar. Like the tool that I kind of prescribed for myself in terms of like visualizing myself going back in time, being in that place with him. It was like I took myself through EMDR through my art, which I think is really cool to make the parallels between that. And EMDR has been something that has really resonated with me as an Anishinaabe person who is kind of always jumping time in that way and like visualizing different things. And time is so circular in our worldview. So that was a cool kind of connection to make between EMDR art and, being Anishinaabe. Um, but yeah, for me, art, it's just like that natural place of pure, like that's where I feel whole. Not all the time. Sometimes I'm painting and it's just like very run of the mill. But there
Mhm,
are certain moments where I'm like, I just feel like everything I am is there in that moment.
mhm, mhm. And yeah, you mentioned holding a few people in the book, like your ancestors, um, yourself, like your younger selves. Um, yeah, I think there were others, but I can't remember right now. But I did notice that, and I did think this is very, very therapy of Quill.
I know. I know. I got some but that's what I mean about the disembodiment is like I can still be doing these things, right? Like intellectualizing everything, even doing practices like this that bring me back in time and I'm dealing with it, but I'm still, disassociated. And that's how like strong the hold is of disembodiment on us.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question. How do you balance writing from an intensely personal place with addressing broader questions of collective liberation?
Um, for me, like the book is really personal. There's like a whole chapter that's, you know, kind of charts. It's like a like storytelling kind of about who I am. For me, that was kind of like a responsibility. I didn't necessarily want to share those things about myself, but I felt like I needed to share my own lived experiences in relation to the concepts of the book. So, if I'm going to write a book that's about, disembodiment, I have to tell you how I've come to know disembodiment. And so that was the reason why I kind of wove in my personal trauma. But I also I didn't want to write a book that was for the consumption of my trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very surface level, right? It's like, this is one of my experiences, but I'm not going to like go into detail. I'm just letting you know that I've had it and it contributes to my disembodiment. Also, I think being primed by working with Indigenous youth for so long and in that space, I really I give them everything. And I had given them everything for so many years. I've sat in circle with so many of them and been like, look at me, like look at my deepest traumas, my deepest harms, my secrets. I have been doing that for so long that when it came to actually like writing them out in the book, I was like, whatever. Just like I'm over that. Like, so the bringing the personal into it was actually pretty easy. I think the collective liberation stuff also felt like so urgent and so occupying of my mind that it felt easy to write. The Palestine chapter was hard for me to write because I just had so much more to say. But also it was so in it. Like I was writing it as we were like in it, right? I was like starting the book October 2023, trying to speed write the book. Basically, when we went on the delegation, that was like
Mm-hmm.
the period of time where I was like, oh my God, I have to finish the book. And so it was hard to be like, to not have things have landed yet and to like put them out onto the page. And I was like
Mm-hmm.
worried that I hadn't grounded those thoughts enough. But I think it's just like a snapshot of where I was at the time. So that was probably the hardest chapter to write. The Palestine one and the pleasure one was also hard to
Mm-hmm.
write because I was like, I this is the one area I need to do way more work on. So I don't want to write about it.
Mm-hmm. But you did.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there's another question. How do we feel comfortable with rest when we are invested in liberation and we know every moment counts? And I'm not sure if this was a question or a quote because I think it is, or maybe the person's asking the question back at you. Um, that was me quoting Quill. Apologies. You can answer the question if you want, but it was a question you brought up.
True. Yeah. I don't know if I have the answer to that one, honestly. I need help answering the question. That one.
Okay, so that'll be a group effort. And okay, I think those are the questions from everyone that's here. Is there anything that you want to share, Quill, that we didn't ask before wrapping up?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I'd just love to hear like what it's like being in a position where you are tasked with helping somebody so individually, and then you're also obviously invested in like the collective and liberation. And this moment in time, I feel like is so, there's just so many layers that everyone's working through. So what is it like to kind of translate a collective experience and collective responsibility to an individual in like in your therapy work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And feel free, other therapists, to answer in the chat too, because I'll just speak for myself. I mean, it's really challenging, and therapy is very humbling for me at the same time. It's like you develop this intimate relationship with this person. You're holding them and offering them, like trying to offer them all these layers, trying to also hold the context of the world at the same time, how it's shaped them. Um, and then, you know, thinking about the limitations of it. And I think, there was a moment when I believed that, well, if we work, on our individual selves, that will get us closer to liberation. But I don't actually think that's the case. Like I think that, it's pretty limited. I am grateful to be able to do the work where people can deepen their like sense of self and process process, what they need to process to have more space so that they can do more work, that they can do work around collective liberation. Like I'm grateful to be able to hold that with people. And at the same time, you know, we see how many people are in therapy and did not speak out against the genocide, right? And for me, that was like an eye-opening moment where I was just like, well, I don't really think this translates. Like this individual therapy doesn't really translate to liberation. Um, but there are like, I also don't want to think about it as a binary, right? Like there are like moments where, when you do deepen work with people and they are working towards liberation, then they can deepen their work towards liberation and they do see the interconnectedness and we see the interconnectedness with each other. Um, and so that I think feels more promising and hopeful for me, but I do believe, like, as therapists, we have another role to play that's beyond like the individual one-on-one sessions,
Mm.
which is, kind of looking at things like um, looking at community therapy, like group therapy, liberation psychology, looking at decolonial psychology, which is actually what our next talk is about. So Franklin will tell us about that. But looking at like these different models of um, collective care, collective liberation that we can use our skills for, rather than just like the one-on-one work.
Mm.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much for sharing. Super interesting.
Yeah. I'm curious what others said in the chat, but I'll look later.
Yeah. Other than that, I think I'm good. I don't have anything else I want to say about the book or anything.
Okay. Well, there have been mentions in the chat of where to get the book, and Franklin, who will also close us off, will mention where to get the book. So thank you so much, Quill. It's been so good to have you, really, and to know you and to be in your life. And thank
Yeah.
you for your work.
Thank you so much. I know it's so hard when you know someone because I'm like, everything we're saying, I'm almost like, I want to cry, but then it would be weird for everyone else. So we're just like But it's so nice to see you in this context. And thank you so much for having me and making space for this work.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I just saw a comment in the chat like, crying's not weird for therapists, so you're in good company. All right, I just did share some resources in the chats for folks if they want to check out my message, but I'll also go through it all here. First, I want to just thank you, Quill, for speaking with us today with so much generosity and curiosity and vulnerability, and to Tanya as well for leading that discussion and for bringing your own insights and reflections in conversation with Quill in her book. Um, if you don't already have her book, I bet you were inspired by today's talk. So please check out that message that I just sent in the chat. We link to her book. If you already have one, consider getting a copy for someone else. I was joking with Tanya that I keep having to buy a new copy because I keep giving them to friends and family and comrades. It's definitely the kind of book you want to share with folks, so you can talk about it. So please consider that and boycott Indigo Books on Amazon and shop local wherever you can. Thanks everyone who spent your time with us today, for sharing in the chat, and for people watching this recording later. There's lots of folks who signed up who couldn't come but said, I'm watching the recording later. And everyone who is able to donate, we want to keep these events accessible. So there's always a free ticket option. But if you have the means, we really appreciate it. Today we raised over $800. And those donations allow us to compensate our speakers, cover any costs for putting on these events, and we always donate the rest to a grassroots organization or campaign that the speaker chooses. So for this event, we'll be splitting donations between Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction and the Senabel team in Gaza. We shared links to those initiatives in the chat. Please check out their work, share and uplift them wherever you can, and donate directly if you're able to. Okay, next month, we're really excited to host another conversation in our Therapy is Political series, this time featuring Rami Barhoush. Rami is a Lebanese community psychology practitioner, educator, and storyteller whose work lives at the intersection of healing, power, and collective transformation. Grounded in liberation psychology, decolonial thought, community organizing, and pedagogy, he explores how colonial and capitalistic systems shape how we see ourselves in the world, relate to one another, and imagine what is possible. Across Lebanon, the US, and Canada, Rami collaborates with Swana and other racialized communities to cultivate relational care, critical consciousness, and collective action. His work moves beyond individual therapy models toward building community collectives that restore memory where erasure occurred, rebuild connection where fragmentation was normalized, expand imagination where systems have narrowed it, and strengthen collective agency in the face of structural constraint. So really natural, conversation to happen after the one we've had today. We're so excited to have him. Please spread the word about the event. You'll see social media posts and Eventbrite up about that soon, so you can get your tickets. Please look out for emails from us. If you haven't received one, but you're here, you probably got one. Just check your spam folders, put us in your contacts. We'll be following up with registration details. That next event is happening March 25th. That's the date. And we also share organizing resources that Therapists for Palestine put together specifically for therapists to take action, take a liberatory anti-colonial approach in our work, not just inside the therapy room, but also outside. As Quill and Tanya spoke about today, we need more people willing to do anti-colonial work. And whether you're already organizing or you're new to it, we want to put out resources that help you learn and find your comrades and self-organize to take that action. One way we want to support you with this is that we started a WhatsApp community, and I've dropped the invite to that in the chat. We hope you'll all join. This is a virtual community meant to be a space where you can keep the conversation going between events, introduce yourself, connect with like-minded people, whether they're therapists or people otherwise invested in liberatory approaches to mental health. And please use that space to start conversations, find people, share resources and campaigns that you know about that support Palestinian liberation. We'll also use that space to keep you updated on our own events and campaigns and resources. that brings us to the end of our event today. We really look forward to staying connected with everyone in our WhatsApp group and on social media and at future events. Thank you all for your time and for coming. See you at the next one.